Hello, ministry company, family, and friends. I'm excited. Now we're going to go through Ephesians chapter 4. And this is a long chapter and a very rich chapter. A lot of the times the focus goes to, the fivefold ministry, but there's so much else in this chapter. So we're going to start right at verse 1. I'm going to read chapter 4, verse 1 to 6 to start. I, therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling which you were called, with all lowliness and gentleness, with long-suffering, bearing with one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called in one hope of your calling. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in you all. And when I read this, I just see that picture of the body, and understanding that we each have a place in the body, and we each have a responsibility within the body. And in that union of the body of Christ, what we do affects everyone else around us. And that's in good ways and in bad ways. We work together as his body to function as the church for this world to see, so that they can see the excellence that he lived out as his example. Now we are that example to the world as his body. And it brought to me this example of a finger. If we injure one of our fingers, we don't just cut it off. We don't just remove it from the body, but we give generally better care to that part. We treat it with a little bit more gentleness. In the Passion Translation, it says, demonstrate gentleness and generous love toward one another, especially towards those who may try your patience. So what I see here is just that understanding as the body. When we're strong, our job is to come beside those who maybe are struggling or who are going through weakness or who are having a trying time, and be that gentleness and that encouragement to lift them up and to prop them up. In the sense of a finger that's broken, you bind them together so that the one finger that's strong is supporting the finger that's weak. And it's not until something like an infection starts to spread, when a finger becomes like gangrene or infected, that there becomes a problem where maybe that finger isn't part of the body anymore. It dies. But that in general, the body is to be brought to a place of healing within itself, within each other. We have antibodies that fight infections. We have parts of the body that are really just called to be that fight for each other. And I see that here as this divine calling is to be support for one another, to be the nurturing, to be the ones who bring healing and not condemnation or separation. And I think we see in verse 7, it says, to each one of us grace was given according to the measure of Christ's gifts. Therefore, he says, when he ascended on high, he led captivity captive and gave gifts to men. And it says that there was a measure of grace given. And I think we see a lot of times with the grace given, it's when we walk in that grace, when we use that grace to fulfill what Christ has called us to, that we see fruitfulness, that we see good things happen through that. It's when we walk outside of that grace, when we try to, as we saw in previous chapters, when we try to do things on our own strength, or when we try to do things contrary to what God's called us to, that we see this unfruitful growth. It reminds me of the grapevines in my backyard. And they grow like crazy every spring, but there's no fruit on them because it's just that it's going along the fence, but it's not a healthy growth. And when we function outside of that grace gift that God's given us, the growth that we see isn't going to be healthy. It's not going to bring life or fruitfulness. And verse 9 says, now this, he ascended. What does it mean but that he also first descended into the lower parts of the earth? He who descended is also the one who ascended far above all the heavens, that he might fill all things. So, through that power of Christ, through that his descending and his ascending, and now we know he sits at the right hand of the Father, and he has power and authority. It's through that connection with his grace that we have the power and the authority to do what he's called us to do, that he's going to establish his dominion everywhere, meaning his grace gifts now function in power and authority within the fullness of his kingdom realm.